Hey guys, today we are going to be looking at Deathwing. Deathwing is one of the coolest heroes to enter the Nexus, and we are going to be going over all of his talents, his abilities, as well as some possible builds for things that you might be doing on Deathwing. To start off, Deathwing is a huge hero with a lot going on, and he's actually the only hero that has the 2,000 gold, or sorry, 20,000 gold price point. He's the only one that I've ever seen above 15,000, and there was a lot of work put into him. He's a really cool hero. Let's break down what he does and all of his talents. But before that, I do want to share a little bit of his basic idea. And I've talked about Deathwing before, and if you haven't heard about Deathwing, he cannot be healed outside of globes, his own talents, and fountains, as well as his own Dragonflight ability, which makes it to where I'm going to make the call that in the competitive scene, Deathwing is not a main tank. And I would not even use Deathwing as a main tank despite him having, like, seriously, the hugest health bar, the highest health pool outside of, like, Stitches, when he gets, like, a couple globes. But I would not use Deathwing as a tank. My reasoning for this is I've played tank. In fact, I used tank 2 to 3 seasons to go from low ranks to high ranks, all the way up to Grandmaster playing tanks. And you need to be able to take hits for your team. You need to be able to stay in fights for a long period of time. When all your team is struggling and you need someone to just hold that point for a little bit longer as your team hits some fountains, then comes back, defends something, you need to be able to go there, pop defensive cooldowns, heal for a little bit, and then when your team gets back in, they heal you back up to full. Like, you need that ability as a tank, and Deathwing cannot do that. One of the things that he can do is Deathwing is not allowed to get healing from allies. He is not allowed to get any sort of benefits from allies whatsoever. The only healer that can actually heal Deathwing is Alexstrasza after she finishes the globe quest, as she can drop down globes for him. That is it. And I wouldn't even say Alexstrasza is the best healer for him, because ultimately a globe here or there during a fight is not going to be worth having, instead of having someone like Deckard who can just lock everyone down while he gets a giant breath going. So I would rather have CC-oriented healers, or just have healers that synergize better with your team rather than healers that synergize with Deathwing, because ultimately, because he's not a tank, that means that his role is going to be in the solo lane. Well, he may struggle against some solo laners because he does not have a lot of sustain. That's kind of irrelevant, because whenever he needs to, instead of backing when he gets low like a lot of solo laners, he can simply just jump in the air every 45 seconds, gain all of his life back, and drop back down. And in fact, you only really need to save this cooldown for 45 seconds before an objective spawns, because as long as you keep yourself topped off before then, it's okay if you lose almost all of your health before an objective spawns, because you're going to be popping this ult, or this jump, this flight, right before then anyways. So it's mostly irrelevant to worry about health or anything in the solo lane, because you have tools to get that back. So ultimately, his best role is going to be in the solo lane, and I think he's going to be a really powerful solo laner as long as you play him carefully and you know when to jump in. If you liked the Dahaka playstyle of play a little aggressive but overall safe in the solo lane, until the objective spawns, and then surprise the enemies with this jump in, immediately use your abilities, immediately lock down people, and then you kind of don't have anything else to do for the fight other than be a big body. That's essentially what Deathwing's going to be, except for in a more riskier but more powerful version of a Dahaka. Someone who also works on more maps because you don't need to be near bushes. But overall, that's where I'm going to be playing him, is the solo lane. And with that in mind, I do also want to say that I'm going to be looking at his abilities and talents with that mindset. So the first thing is that he does have Dragonflight. After 3 seconds, this gets interrupted by damage. Fly into the sky, becoming immune to all effects, gaining 2.5% of your health per second. This could be increased or decreased based off balance. Once cast, this ability cannot be interrupted. When you fly, you can then drop down into either form. We'll talk about the forms in a bit. And when you fly, you have to wait 8 seconds before dropping down in either form. So you need to make sure that you fly a little bit before you'll actually need to do anything. As think about it like Falstad's, where Falstad kind of needs to get halfway to the fight before he uses his flight, because his flight isn't in a real global. It's kind of like a half of the map global. It's kind of the same idea, but you could stay in the lane a little bit longer. So what I would recommend is I would wait till the objective has spawned, and then I would take a glimpse down there and just kind of go, is this good yet? And then pop your Z, because you will have to wait 8 seconds to join the fight. Everything Deathwing does is on a delay, which means that people that are better about predicting fights are going to do much better on Deathwing in general. So let's talk about his forms. So we have the Destroyer form, which is all about jumping around the fight, trying to be in the middle of the fight. It tends to do more damage initially, but it's also a little bit scarier because you need to be in the middle of the fight. It's less AoE. I mean, it still has big AoEs, but it's more about just quickly getting around the fight and being as scary as possible. Really low cooldown abilities, allowing you to really jump on people when you need to. Then we have the World Breaker, which is all AoEs, zoning, very slow abilities, very, I would say not too long of cooldowns, but you're not going to be doing like a whole bunch at once all the time. Then we have, so starting off in the Destroyer form, the quick moving around the fight form, we have Molten Flame. That'll be available in both of these. This is his bread and butter for damage. What this does is you set it in a direction, you cannot move it once it is casted, and it will burn through 30 of your energy per second. Outside of that, you will gain 5 energy per second back, so you want to make sure, and all of your abilities use this energy, so in my opinion, you want to make sure that you use your other abilities first, because those are going to be doing effectively more per energy used. For example, this will be doing, let's see, 46 damage times 8. Let's get a calculator out. Let's go 46 times 8. This will do 368 damage in the first second, while this will do so effectively for 30 energy, you're doing 300 damage. For 15 energy, you're doing 180. So it's slightly more efficient to go with an Incinerate route. Plus, Incinerate covers just a much larger radius than you have for the Molten Flame. Plus, Molten Flame is much easier to dodge because once you see it, you just step down or up. While this one, on the other hand, you're not going to really see it until it happens. So efficiency, you want to be using Incinerate as often as you can, especially with Onslaught as well. If you can hit someone at the end of your Onslaught, it does a decent amount of damage. 184 damage plus 360 damage plus an auto attack, you do 907 damage. Super efficient damage, plus you can hit everyone along the path as well. Get to their back line and hit their back line for a decent chunk of damage. It is does it hit everyone along the path? Yeah, it does. Okay. It is a decent chunk of damage, very efficient. So your Molten Flame is probably your least efficient damage, but it's your highest potential damage. So if people are CC'd, you do want to hit them with the flame for as long as possible because it is the highest amount of damage. But ultimately, your combo should look something like this, where you charge in, you do a W, and then you might reposition and then do a quick breath and try to just deal as much possible damage as you can. Against CC'd enemies, you can see there's a high potential of damage before we even get into the talents, which is really cool. But targets are often going to be moving around these fights as much as possible, which is why I would prioritize auto attacks, E's, and W's in Destroyer form. And then in your other form, I would just use your abilities and switch to Molten Flame. So let's talk about the other form, because the ultimate ability is going to be the same in both forms, and the fire is also going to be the same. So in World Breaker form, your abilities are very long range, your abilities are very slow, and they are very big, but they also have very long cooldowns. So Lava Burst doesn't do a lot of damage, but it's got an amazing slow, and it lasts for as long as its cooldown is. So let's say this is the Sky Temple point. We've seen the Sky Temple point. The temple's here, there's a bit of junk here, and there's one exit here for one team and one exit here for the other team. You could leave this ability here kind of like a Chromie slow and just keep fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting, and if the enemies decide to leave, you can have that slow going the entire fight so they can never leave. And if the enemies are split from each other, the enemies don't really want to walk in here, because let's say the enemy team decides that they want to walk in here. What do? You zone off this entire objective while the enemy team is in there, and your team kills off the enemies while you're zoning out the enemies. So it's a really cool tool, because remember, if we get a full Dragon's Breath in here, look at how much damage this could do to one person at a full Dragon's Breath. you have 2,600 damage. So an assassin that's trying to get to his tank, or a healer that's trying to get to his team, could lose his entire health bar by you just zoning this out with a lava burst and a molten flame. And a team without their healer in here is likely going to die. So that's one of the cool things about that form, is you've got that. Now, Earth Shatter is a stun that's in a V shape. It stuns on a path, and it will go down the path from you to the end. So not only is there a delay, a cast time on the ability itself, but there is also another delay. So the people that are at the end of this will likely get away, but the people that are close will be stunned immediately. So watch the target dummy to and like that's right next to me, and watch the target dummy that's a little further away. The one next to me gets stunned immediately, while the one further away gets stunned a little bit later. So this is a great ability to start while you're near an enemy, or it's a great ability to have where you're slowing the back line, and then you stun the ones near you, and you go and stun the ones further away while they're slowed. But overall, it's an unreliable stun that's great for people that are already CC'd, or just when the fights get a little too chaotic for people to know what's going on. His ultimate ability is a Syndragosa ult that brings you to the other side of it. If you play League of Legends, think Syndra or Shyvana's ult. And it's got a bit of a delay, and this is your best way to move around the battlefield if you really need to move around the battlefield. Its damage is very, very low, but it's if they stay in it for a long period of time, it can add up. But overall, it's very low damage. I would say primarily use this to get around the battlefield, as well as you can use it a little bit for zoning, but ultimately, it's not that high of damage. It's just there to kind of be annoying. Like, for example, I put that on all of the enemies, and it did 7,000 damage. And that's an ultimate. Now let me just use my breath on 3 enemies. We have 8,000 damage over just a breath. So breath does considerably more damage with a lower cooldown, which is why I recommend Cataclysm be used mostly as an escape, honestly, unless your team's really jumping into the fight. But I think you should jump into the fight with Dragonflight exactly where you should be. Then I think that you should be using all of your abilities to be as disruptive and doing as much damage as possible. And then when it's time for you to get out of the fight, you should use Cataclysm to get out, hit a fountain, whatever else you need to hit. You can jump back in the fight for one more fight, and then after that you should be using Dragonflight to reposition or get wherever you need to. And ultimately, that's how the combo, or that's how a team fight should work for you. If Sky Temple spawns, you should jump in with Dragonflight as soon as you possibly can. Do as much damage as possible, lose as many plates as possible. Then you're going to be using your Cataclysm to go through the enemy team, get away from them, hit a fountain, hit whatever you need to, get back into the fight at a range, most likely in World Breaker form for the second portion. And then after World Breaker and you used a bunch of abilities, you're going to step back and use Dragonflight. If the fight's still going, say it was a map, like Sky Temple should be over by now, but say it was like a Cursed Hollow where you just like, man, it's still going, everything's getting awkward. You're going to Dragonflight, gain all of your plates back, gain all of your health back, and jump back down to the fight one more time to hopefully finish off everyone. That's the longest that you could ever fight on Deathwing, ultimately. But for the short fights, it's primarily just going to be using up all of your plates, your ult, and then maybe just heading back to lane. And then if you head back to lane, you could just wait till your Dragonflight's back up. It has half the cooldown of every other global in the game, which means that you could possibly just walk back to lane and then have it ready if the fight continues for that much longer. As far as his trait, he is unstoppable, as well as he has these armor plates. So he will be losing 10 armor for each area, and he'll be left with 10 armor for his last 40 or 25% of his health. So first 25%, he has 40 armor. Then he's going to go down to 30 armor. Then he's going to go down to 20 armor, and he'll have 10 armor for that last portion. And that's essentially how his armor mechanic works. He's permanently unstoppable, and he cannot get heals or anything from his allies. That being said, let's move into his talents. So Dragon Soul, this gives him some healing during team fights. He can get some healing from his Dragon Breath if he's in his Destroyer form hopping around the fights. He can do his Dragon Breath to get healed for 75% of the damage dealt. As you saw, I could do about 8,000 damage at level 20, and I have 7,017 health. So you could effectively gain about 6,000 if you were able to hit 3 people with your Molten Flame. And realistically, you're not going to be hitting that very often, but this is the best way to heal yourself back in team fights. Molten Blood's your best way to heal yourself back in the solo lane. Remember, I consider him a solo laner, so this is going to be your best bet against pokey heroes. This, essentially, when you're on your 75% or higher health, you are going to effectively have 3 times your health regen. So it's going to be really hard to break that initial amount as a single person, unless you're playing like a Tychus or someone who has that percent health. But that increased regen is going to make it really, really hard to blow through that, allowing you to effectively stay alive against most solo laners for a long time. Then we have Draconic Might, which is going to be the best option for team fights. This gives you basic attacks are going to heal you whether or not you have plates. And it makes it to where when you are losing an armor plate, you're going to gain 0.75 seconds of protected. So let's say there's a Tychus using Bigger They Are, and he gets you down that first plate. Well, for the next 0.75 seconds, his Bigger They Are is not going to do any damage, which means for a decent chunk of his Bigger They Are, he's only going to blow 1 plate. So it's a really good protection against a Tychus that's going Bigger They Are, which is honestly the biggest counter to Deathwing out of literally anything. The second biggest counter is Cursed Bullet. So Cursed Bullet's going to do the damage initially, and then you're going to get that plate. So Cursed Bullet's still going to be a really big pain for Draconic Might, but he can only do that once, and for the next couple plates, it's going to be pretty strong. This also synergizes with a couple later talents to make it to where this is really the best team fight talent for whenever you're going to be jumping into the team fights over and over and over. So if you're going into laner, or you're in a lane that you don't need to win, Draconic Might would definitely be a great option for so many people. So we're going to end up taking Molten Blood, though, just for the sake of moving along in these talents. In Furnace, you do more damage the higher energy you have. So if you don't use your other abilities before you use Molten Flame, you can use Dragon Soul to kind of get your life back. But ultimately, you're going to be kind of 50% energy for the most part during team fights, which means that using this for healing is not going to be a great tool. But using this to jump into the fight and then immediately start burning people when you land down, could be a really good tool for following up some CC that your team's doing. Heat Wave. In Destroyer, after hitting an enemy hero with Incinerate, that's your AoE. Let me switch over. Incinerate is your big AoE. Deathwing deals 35 damage per second to all nearby enemies for the next 8 seconds, stacks up to 4 times. Remember, this has a very low cooldown, lasts for 8 seconds, so you'll be able to keep stacking this. You can also hit multiple enemies, but this is actually just... Actually, does this? Hold on. Let's see if this stacks immediately if you hit 4. Yeah, so it'll hit immediately if you hit those 4. Really high damage. I mean, as far as DPS goes, if you're stacking this completely, you're doing assassin level DPS for the longer you're in these fights. So it's a really high damage talent if you do end up picking it up. In World Breaker, it increases the explosion damage of Lava Burst. So, and Dragon Soul, that's each of these talents that affect your abilities affect both, or affect both sides. So, same thing with your Dragon Soul, your healing is based off of your Lava Burst. So, if you want kind of a ranged pokey build that heals you, you can pick up Dragon Soul, and then you can also pick up Heat Wave, allowing you to just kind of stay at a range and heal yourself back up. And it's kind of a unique build because you could jump in, do as much damage as you want with Incinerate, and then when you start getting kind of low, you can jump away from the fight, switch forms, and then start poking the enemies with Lava Burst every 6 seconds to try to gain your life back. Because your your explosion is going to be doing increased damage, and your explosion is going to be healing for 150% of the damage dealt. So it's a pretty decent playstyle if you want that in and out playstyle for Deathwing. Dragon's Ire. So Dragon's Ire is, while Deathwing has 3 or fewer armor plates, his damage is increased by 30%. So the idea behind this one for me is if you want to go a more teamfight oriented build, you can go with Draconic Might to where you deal... you heal yourself for the damage dealt with basic attacks, and you can also increase the damage you deal with those basic attacks. So when you're at high health, it's going to take you forever to get down to low health because of all the protected, and then when you're at low health, you're going to be healing yourself more off of attacks. So if you could kill 1 or 2 people to where they're less threatening on the enemy team, you are going to be really, really scary with this talent. Level 7. We're going to be looking at talents that are going to affect your drop down. Firestorm, when you land, you drop 7 meteors. They prioritize heroes, and they deal 143 damage to the enemy's hit. Each meteor that hits will reduce your cooldown. So if you do want to use this to jump down multiple times in a fight, so for example, if you did want to drop down on them, hit a couple heroes, deal a bunch of damage, use your ult to get out of the fight, use your Dragonflight to get back healthy, and then drop down one more time, Firestorm is going to be the talent for you. Death Drop, hitting an enemy hero with Destroyer or Worldbreaker landing reduces their spell armor for a little while, as well as it reduces your cooldowns by 2 seconds. So that means you can drop down and immediately do damage because your cooldown or your abilities normally have a 3-second cooldown. So you're going to drop down, have a 1-second cooldown, immediately start dealing damage to enemies that have reduced spell armor. So this will be really great if you are going like that heat wave build where you can drop down on a bunch of enemies, heat wave immediately, and you're going to be doing all that bonus crit damage, that 1500 DPS against people who have low spell armor. It's going to be really an incredibly high amount of damage. Skyfall. After using Dragonflight, Deathwing can drop meteors anywhere within vision for 127 damage in the area, has 3 charges. If a hero is hit, Deathwing heals for 5% of his maximum health, reducing landing cooldown by 1.5 seconds. So you land down. You go in the air, and while you're in the air, you can drop meteors down, which will again just heal you. I believe these do damage, and then when you land, I'm actually not sure. Landing cooldowns. Okay. So you use this, and then you jump in the air, and it's going to reduce the cooldown of you landing. So if you need to have global that gets to your team really fast... I don't have vision. Interesting. You can only cast those in vision. So you can drop down faster after throwing out those. So that's interesting. If you're global against another global, that might be the option just to make sure that you get there at the same time. Level 10, you can either upgrade your ult. Remember how I said that his ult does like no damage and should only be used for escapes? Well, at this point, you can actually upgrade your ult to where it does a lot more damage, and it's actually really, really scary. And if you destroy a fort or keep, you get the cooldown reset. This can be a great tool for sieging forts with an objective. Say, for example, you are pushing with a boss. You could pop your ult so that the boss is going to be defended, right? So that the boss won't have any issues. Then once the fort is destroyed because of the boss, you can pop your ult again and immediately start doing a lot more damage. And overall, it's a really, really powerful tool for games where objectives are going to get you a fort. I would say this is going to be best on Tomb of the Spider Queen. You push with the lane, you're most likely to get a fort. Now, there might even be a chance that you can get this multiple times on those maps, because on Tomb of the Spider Queen, you're pushing all 3 at the same time. So if half your team's on mid fort and half your team's on top fort, you can find the one that's going to be destroyed first, ult it so that you're covering that zone, making it to where the enemies don't want to defend against it. You get your ult cooldown off, you head up to top lane, you ult it, and then you try to zone out that one as well. You grab that one, and then you can even ult one more time right after that if you wanted to try to force a fight. Overall, really, really powerful talent on certain maps. On other maps that are more teamfight oriented, or you fight on objectives that are really far from forts, Bellowing Roar gives you a Horrify that you can activate anywhere near you. So what you're going to want to combine this with is with your ultimate and with your onslaught, so you can get in the middle of the enemy team. So in this case, I would be trying to drop down in the middle of the team, and then I'd want to reposition with either my ultimate, and then reposition right here, reposition over here, and then we're going to immediately Bellowing Roar and try to horrify everyone away, spread out their team, and give this time to where we can DPS them for free. It's a really powerful talent for those types of team fights. So I would say both of these ults are going to be very good in either build that you want to look at them in. Level 13, Wicked Inferno. Reduce Molten Flame's energy cost. So this means you can just flame more often. Remember, this is your bread and butter damage for a lot of your builds. So this also allows you to do a lot of wave clear. So overall, it's just a really solid talent. Ruination. In Destroyer form, the Bite of Onslaught now slows for 60% for 1.5 seconds. It's a huge slow. And then in Worldbreaker, it reduces your Earth Shatter's cooldown by 6 seconds and the energy cost by 10. So Earth Shatter is your stun. So now you'll have your stun every 6 seconds with a lower energy cost. So you'll be able to slow people every 6 seconds and stun people every 6 seconds. Both are really great talents for controlling the battlefield. And then Fire and Fury, basic attacks against rooted, slowed, or stunned enemies, deal 30% increased damage and reduce the cooldown of Deathwing's basic abilities by 0.5 seconds. So again, in this heavy DPS build where you're going to be using Incinerate a lot, you are going to want to have those cooldowns lowered so you can stack that up faster and deal even more damage. So what you'll do is you'll be charging into slow people, or you'll do an Incinerate, then you'll charge into slow people, auto attack them, reduce the cooldown of both your W and your onslaught. So Fire and Fury is going to be amazing in this build, or at least in this form, while the other form maybe not so much. So the other form, if you're going to be in a more ranged form for the most part, you're going to want to go Wicked Inferno, and if you want to be a more melee form, you're going to be going Fire and Fury. Then at level 16, usually the biggest power spike for most heroes, let's talk about the talents that he gets. Conflagration, 700 damage with Molten Flame. Sorry, if you deal 700 damage with Molten Flame within 4 seconds, causes them to burn for additional damage. So if you hit a target that's CC'd, 702 damage. Again, at level 20, this does 360 damage per second. So this is 2 seconds of Molten Flame. They will burn over time. While burning, they will explode every 1 second, dealing damage to all nearby enemies. This is going to be your huge damage for ranged teams if you need that zone control and the enemies are all melee, or even 2 or 3 melee heroes. This is enough to clear out a game. Huge amounts of damage, huge AoEs. You are essentially a Kael'thas every time you press your Q. Gaze Unto Destruction. Hitting enemy heroes with Destroyer or World Breaker's landing causes their damage to be reduced by 75% and slow them for 40% for 5 seconds. So you jump into the fight. If you can jump in on their assassins and actually land it, you pretty much just won the fight, because you're going to be lowering their damage. You're going to be jumping on them with all your stuff, dealing all of their health, and you pretty much won the fight. Elementium Plating. And again, this is more of if the enemies are trying to counter you a lot. Activate to gain a shield equal to 35% of your missing health for 8 seconds. While the shield holds, you gain 2% of your max health per second. When the shield expires or is destroyed, regain armor plates appropriate to his new health. So, for 8 seconds, you can gain a maximum of 16% of your health, which means that if you were right about here, you will gain 1 plate back. If you were right about here, you will gain 1 plate back. But you can't gain more than 2 plates with Elementium Plating. However, there is sort of a way that you can, which is if you gain healing from other methods. Because it does not say the health healed, gain the plates back for the health healed. It says gains the appropriate amount of plates for your new health. So you could grab a fountain, you could grab some healing off of some of the other abilities like the Draconic Might or the Dragon Soul, and then you can pop Elementium Plating to gain all of your armor back. Which this is the only other way to get your armor back outside of using your flight, because you will not get your flight back, or you will not get your armor back from just hitting a fountain. You have to use flight. So I think ultimately in the competitive scene, this is going to be the go-to talent to keep him in fights for longer. But I do still like this heavy damage build. So I will be doing 2 videos to explain his damage build as well as his more most likely competitive build. And we'll see which one ends up being a little bit better. Now, onto his level 20 talents. Stood in the Fire. If you don't get that reference, you have not played enough World of Warcraft. Stood in the Fire. Enemy heroes are slowed by 40% while standing in scorched ground, and its duration is increased by 50%. This would be a great talent to combine with something like Fire and Fury, where you can slow their entire team, and you'll be having really, really low cooldowns for all of your abilities. Not only that, but it also is going to increase the duration. It's also really good if you have Burn Beneath My Shadow, because you're going to be doing 150% more damage, and it's going to last 50% longer. It already lasts a really long time, 6 seconds, so it'll be lasting 9 seconds. And instead of doing 150 damage a second, it's going to be doing 250 damage per second. It's insane. All those are going to synergize really well. Arrival of a God. Destroyer or World Breaker's landing damage is increased by 400%, and you gain all of his level 7 talents. So what's going to happen is you are going to be dropping meteors from the sky, reducing your cooldown. Then you're going to be dropping down, reducing everyone's spell damage, and decreasing the time it's going to take for casting all of your abilities. And you're going to be dropping down and doing meteors to everyone. And if you combine that with the fact that you could also be dropping down lowering their damage, then popping your ult, jumping away, and then using your global again. Arrival of God is going to be a very powerful talent for an in-and-out playstyle. Destroyer's Rampage. Landing in Destroyer form empowers Deathwing's damage, and his basic abilities cool down faster. Damaging heroes refreshes his effects, and switching to World Breaker removes the effect. So in Destroyer form, again, the form that I think is going to be doing the most damage and the most effect during these fights, outside of competitive anyways, if you drop down in Destroyer, you are going to be doing more damage. Your cooldowns are going to be coming back faster, and it's going to be overall really, really crazy. So let me talk about the two builds. This video is getting rather long, but it is a Deathwing. Let me talk about the two builds that I recommend for you guys to use on Deathwing, and go over what I would actually recommend the most. So I would recommend that there's going to be a high damage build to jump in these fights and do a bunch of damage as fast as possible. And this is going to be oriented especially on the Destroyer form. So this Destroyer form, again, there's two builds. And this will change as balance happens, as we actually practice to see what he plays out. But I think there's ultimately two builds. There is the jump in the fight, do a bunch of damage in Destroyer form, and there is an in-and-out playstyle build. So the jump in the fight, do as much damage as possible. We're going to be going Draconic Might, and then once we're in there, we are going to be increasing the Heat Wave damage, or the Incinerate damage. While we are also in Destroyer form, we want to be landing down and immediately using our W as soon as possible and lowering their spell armor. So we're going to be doing that one. Then we're going to be picking up, most likely, we don't want to stop to Bellowing Roar for very long. But again, this is very map specific, so it really depends on what you want to go. Let's say we're on a map that we're going to be constantly fighting on enemy forts like a Tomb of the Spider Queen. We're going to be going Burn Beneath My Shadow. At level 13, what we want to be doing is we want to be making it to where we are getting our cooldowns back faster, and we want to be doing more damage. So we're going to be going Fire and Fury. And then at level 16, Elementium Plating would probably be our best bet, but we're actually not going to be healing very much because it's only from auto attacks. We're not going to be auto attacking that much. So instead, what we want to do is, because we're not going to be attacking that much, we're going to just go all in with the whole idea of landing down and doing as much as possible right after we land down. So we're going to be going Gaze onto Destruction. Followed by that, what we want to be doing is going Destroyer's Rampage. So when we land down, we're going to be really scary with really low cooldowns. And this is essentially what this build is going to look like. Oh man, I'm not going to have vision on this to see. I don't know. We'll just let's turn on an enemy hero and let's see what it does to just a single person. But remember, all of this damage is AoE, so this should be doing a lot of. Actually, I don't want to do Arthas because he's going to slow my attack speed. Let's do like Artanis. Hopefully, he doesn't blind me, but that's fine. Let's pick Artanis and let's toggle minions. So this is kind of the build one that I would want to do, which is let's toggle cooldowns as well. So the idea of this one is we want to always just land down in the Destroyer form. We're going to land down, and our first thing that we need to do is W. The second that it's up, we're going to W. Then we're going to use our E to slow them, auto attack, W again, and then watch us just melt his health. And there we go. So we're going to be doing that, but remember, all the damage is AoE. So we're going to be jumping down, and Destroyer's Rampage, it lasts quite a while and it does a lot of damage. But after that, look at the cooldown of our global. We only have 21 seconds left. So you're going to be constantly just using your W, slowing the enemies using your W, and try not to use your Q because we need that energy to just keep using our W and our Q. Constantly slowing people, lowering the cooldowns of our slows, and continuing to have that AoE fire going. If at any point we're looking like this fight is going poorly, we're just going to pop our ult. We're going to get away from the fight. And after we get away from the fight, we're going to use our Z to get back up in the air. We're going to gain all of our life back, all of our stats back. And then when we see the enemies again or when we're ready to fight again, we're going to drop back down in destroyer form. That's one build. Now, if you guys want to see the other build that I want to share on Deathwing, you're going to have to watch some of my other videos, and there may be a chance of me doing a partnership in the future. So you may need to watch on some other channels as well, and we'll talk about that as we can get to it. So thank you guys so much for watching, and feel free to check out my other videos.